This is Tom Fox, and I'd like to welcome you to a new season of Adventures in Compliance. This season, I'm going to take up the second set of 12 short stories published in the Strand magazine in 1893 and 1894, which were collected in the book The Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes. The Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes was published in the United Kingdom by G. Loons and in the U.S. by Harper's and Brothers. It's the second collection featuring the consulted detective Sherlock Holmes. The Final Problem was published in this series, and that remains one of the top Sherlock Holmes stories of all time, as Doyle was determined to kill off Sherlock Holmes, his most famous character, due to not simply its popularity, but how Holmes in many ways had taken over the life of Doyle the writer. I hope you'll take this opportunity to not simply listen to this podcast series, but also to reread the stories in the Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes. Today we begin an exploration of the Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes with the story of Silver Blaze. It is, of course, one of 56 Sherlock Holmes short stories by Conan Doyle, and it's the first in the collection of the Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes. Today we take up one of the more gruesome stories in the Sherlock Holmes oeuvre, The Adventure of the Cardboard Box, first published in January 1893. As I mentioned, this is one of the most controversial of all the Sherlock Holmes stories. It has endured a checkered history, even at the author's own hands. It was excluded from the first edition of the Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes and the bound volume that collected the second set of Sherlock Holmes stories from the Strand. And while the first American edition did include it, it was swiftly excised from that as well. Doyle removed a short passage regarding Holmes' ability to read Watson's mind and placed it in another story, The Resident Patient. And finally, the adventure's very subject matter seems to have alarmed and repulsed readers of the age. How many other stories, after all, begin with a woman opening a package that has just been delivered to her home and discovering 3 severed ears? The story begins as Miss Susan Cushing, a middle-aged woman, receives a gruesome package in the mail. Inside the box are severed human ears. She is horrified and seeks Holmes' assistance in solving this baffling crime. Holmes examines the package and determines it was sent from Dundee, Scotland. Holmes and his loyal friend, Dr. Watson, visit Miss Cushing's home to gather more information. They learn that Miss Cushing's sister, Sarah, used to live with her but recently moved to a different home. The detective is convinced that the crime is connected to Sarah's new residence. Holmes and Watson travel to Sarah's home in London and question her about the package. Sarah reveals that she has been involved in a love triangle with a married man named Frank and his wife, Adelaide. She recently received a letter from Adelaide accusing her, Sarah, of being a homewrecker. Holmes examines Sarah's belongings and discovers a locked box identical to the one that was sent to Miss Cushing. Inside the box, they find a bloody cloth and the remains of a paper, which contained preserved flowers. Holmes deduces that the ears were intended for Sarah, but they were mistakenly sent to her sister instead. Further investigation reveals that Holmes suspects Frank as the culprit. He confronts Frank, who confesses to the crime, but claims he did not intend to hurt Sarah or harm her. Frank explains that he was driven to madness by jealousy and the discovery of Sarah's affair with another man. In a fit of rage, he committed this gruesome act. Holmes concludes the case and presents the findings to the police. Although Frank is taken into custody, Holmes expresses sympathy for his plight, acknowledging the destructive power of jealousy. They belong to people who met a far grislier end. Susan's sister Mary, for instance, had not been seen for some time. Her lover, too, had vanished, but not her husband, the ill-educated sailor, Jim Browner, who Holmes swiftly reveals had murdered them both and then hacked off their ears. As a warning to the third of the Cushing sisters, Sarah, who once shared an address with Susan and whom he blames for the breakdown of his marriage in the first place. All in all, an ugly tale, and indeed a brutal tale. But, paradoxically, many readers found it to be one of the most suspenseful of all the Sherlock Holmes stories. I hope you will read it and come to your own conclusions on that. I thought the grisliness and gruesomeness of this story would lend itself to exploring some ethical lessons. The Cardboard Box is a short story written by Arthur Conan Doyle, obviously featuring his favorite detective. The story primarily revolves around a murder mystery, yet the gruesomeness can lead to some ethical lessons. So they include a respect for privacy. In the story, a cardboard box containing 2 severed ears is sent anonymously to a woman named Susan Cushing. Holmes and Watson make a point to respect Miss Cushing's privacy and handle the matter discreetly. They do not share the gruesome details of the death with her unless absolutely necessary. This highlights the importance of respecting others' privacies and not necessarily intruding into their personal affairs. Empathy and compassion. Throughout the story, Holmes shows empathy and compassion towards the characters involved. He understands their emotions and listens to their concerns and offers support. This demonstrates the ethical value of being sympathetic towards others, acknowledging their feelings, and showing compassion in difficult situations. Justice and fairness. Holmes is known for his commitment to justice. In this story, Holmes strives to uncover the truth behind the crime and ensure that justice is indeed served. He doesn't allow personal biases or prejudice to cloud his judgment, and he seeks fair treatment for all involved. This emphasizes the importance of upholding justice and fairness in all our actions and decisions. Honesty and integrity. Holmes and Watson maintain honesty and integrity throughout their investigation. They present facts as they discover them and do not manipulate or distort the truth. They also confront the harsh realities of the case and do not shy away from delivering the truth, even if it may be uncomfortable or unpleasant. This teaches the lesson that honesty and integrity are essential virtues in pursuing justice and solving problems. And finally, professional responsibility. As a detective, Holmes has a strong sense of professional responsibility. He takes his role seriously and is dedicated to using his skills to help those in need. He recognizes the importance of his expertise and the impact it can have on people's lives. This highlights the ethical duties professionals have to fulfill their responsibilities diligently and utilize their skills for good. While the Cardboard Box primarily focuses on the investigation and solving of a crime, these ethical lessons demonstrate the underlying principles that Sherlock Holmes upholds not only through this story, but throughout the entire Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes. As I mentioned, I hope you will read this story and come to your own conclusions about ethical lessons of this story, indeed leadership lessons from this story. It's a great learning tool for you as a compliance professional. I hope you'll join us again next week where we take a look at The Adventure of the Yellow Face. If you've enjoyed this episode, I hope you'll subscribe, rate, and review to Adventures in Compliance, wherever great podcasts are listened to, or perhaps even on YouTube. I also hope that you will take this opportunity to reread some of the great Conan Doyle short stories found in the collected works, the Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes. If you'd like to take a deep dive into a particular short story, I'd love to visit with you. So please give me a shout at tfox@tfoxlaw.com. Adventures in Compliance is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network.